Hey everyone, welcome to Ad School. This is a new series from Common Thread Collective, and it's all about the ins and outs of making great digital ad creative. My name's Richard. I'm the senior copywriter here at CTC, and I'll be playing host for our sort of initial series where we're going to go into the 5 steps that I lay out in my article about how to make a great creative strategy. Now, the first episode is going to be all about your product. That is the place that you must begin. You have to fully understand what you're selling in order to sell it to anyone. So my guests for this initial series are Maya, who's our Director of Creative Performance, and Peter, who is our Business Development Manager. And we're going to be getting their perspective on how to think about your product, how to connect it to your audience, and how the product that you want to sell may not be exactly the same as a product that you're going to want to advertise. So class is in session. Let's get into it. So today we're talking about the first point, which is product. And this is a question that, I used to be on growth teams in CTC, and this is a question you run into all the time, which is, what do I sell next? For some brands, that can be a relatively easy question to answer because it's just you only sell one thing, or you sell 5 things, and one of the 5 things that you sell is clearly your hero product, and that's the thing that you need to focus on with your creative strategy. But if that's not the case, there are a couple of tricks that you can implement, I guess, to pick what product you want to sell next, because obviously that's really important. So I guess I'll open it up to Pete and Maya here about when you approach, I guess maybe I'll start with you, Maya. When you approach opening up a new funnel or starting something, or maybe opening up a new audience via a product, how do you go about thinking about that? What's your thought process, I guess?
Yeah, so when I'm thinking about what products we're going to advertise and market, I'm thinking about the products that people buy the most. And then I'm asking myself, okay, which ones are they going to click on? And sometimes those two don't correlate. And it's a really funny thing, right? You might have these bright red tie-dye shoes on in your product offering. And those probably aren't the best selling ones. The black ones are probably the best selling, but the bright red tie-dye version of the black ones is what's going to get people in. And so that's how I think about which products we start with. What is the one that's going to get everyone to come to your site and then increase their average order value because they're so excited about the product that they saw. They get on the site, they see things that are even better or even more aligned with who they are, they buy a ton of stuff. That's best case scenario, right? So that's how I think about picking the product to start with. It's a bit of research with your client, figuring out who their LTV customers are, which products sell the most. And then it's a bit of thinking about your Facebook best practices. You want things that are high contrast. You want things that are eye-catching, maybe things that people aren't used to seeing, right? If I see a black shoe on my Instagram feed, I've seen a ton of black shoes. I own a ton of black shoes. So I'm probably going to buy some more black shoes, but I'm probably not going to stop on these generic ones. I might, however, stop on their like rose gold version, like, ooh, maybe I want to try something different today. And then I end up buying the black ones as well. That's how I think about which product we should focus on, or even which product we should start with in the creative. There's always room to add more. And maybe I'm going off on a tangent here. So I want to pass it to Pete for any thought on this or how clients have come to him about this kind of choice task before. But that's how I think about creating content for products that is going to cause someone to stop in their tracks and be excited about your product.
Yeah, that's awesome, Maya. I think that encapsulates a lot of the way that consumers think from one perspective of, I want to understand something about the brand that's unique. So I think that's awesome. And then I think when I talk to a lot of clients, one of the interesting pieces and relationships that creative has with a brand and with products is kind of twofold from my perspective. And it's understanding deeply who your customers are and what they care about. So instead of trying to showcase a really generic product and a really generic piece of creative to a really broad audience, a lot of times as brands scale, it becomes really important. We talk about this a lot in our process with clients, is thinking about layers of specificity. So if I am going to sell an adventure backpack to an adventure travel audience, I want that specificity to connect on some level where someone can deeply identify with the creative beyond the fact that it's interesting, beyond the fact that it has great copy, beyond the fact that it changes in the first 3 seconds. Like, I want to create and think about my product roadmap. And then as I think about my SKU catalog, one of the things I think that's really interesting is to deeply understand as a brand owner, what types of products do you have available to you to give to the consumer? So we worked with a company a long time ago, not that long ago, 6 months ago, but they sold adventure bags, and their kind of like upsell product was DOP kits, right? So when we think about like the SKU catalog, I think it's important to understand how the creative plays in with the products you're actually selling, because there's a lot of ways to connect with a consumer that deepens the brand and deepens the community beyond the initial piece of creative. And it's important to think about the roadmap of what are we going to develop next as it relates to the creative we already have and the products we're already selling on the front end. So I think those are the two things I think about a lot, is really understanding as we're scaling our ad account, we have to get away from generic, broad creative to a broad audience and think about, as you know, as a travel adventurer, what kinds of content do I connect with? And how as a brand can I deeply understand those people so I can develop my creative to have things that are a little bit more minute and a little bit more specific that only people from that audience would pick up on, but they feel it in a way where you're actually speaking to them versus just showing them a fancy piece of brand creative or something that's, you know, eye-catching in the first, you know, 5 seconds. Obviously those elements are important, but I think there's some depth there as you scale your brand. That's important.
Yeah, totally. And I love how you guys are revealing a couple of sort of new layers to my sort of first piece or first section of that article, rather. Because what I focus on there is sort of the numbers. Like, there are certain products that make sense for your bottom line to push. But to your point, Maya, it's also a question of like, showcasing the product is in and of itself a creative choice. And often you'll see, you know, so I work for, let's say, and I know for apparel brands, this is huge. But people will click on the leopard print shoe and then buy the black shoe. So there's not actually necessarily a correlation between the product that you present and the product that's actually purchased on the back end by the consumer themselves. Although, and I was going to ask you, Maya, that probably shifts depending on the space or industry you're in. So how would you kind of change that advice as you think about other verticals rather than just apparel?
Well, I would say, to your point, it's not one size fits all, right? It's not always going to be the case that the brightly colored shoe or apparel is the one that gets people in. And there's a lot of room to focus on your smaller products or the ones you think sell, or the more basic advertising looking type apparel or e-commerce, whatever you're selling, right? There's space for that. My suggestion, and where I've seen brands have trouble and struggle, is when you try to hit all of the things that you think are going to be good, right? Say you have a shoe brand and you also sell sandals and you also sell slides, and maybe you have a hiking boot or something. We have to look at which one of those you think has the most promise right now based on your user behavior history. And if that is, it's summer and it's sandals, let's go in on sandals. Let's figure out which colors work. Let's figure out what messaging points work. And what we can do once we get sandals to work, we can scale that type of creative out to your different products. And what we're doing effectively when we do that is allowing you to focus your budget, right? We work with entrepreneurs across the scale of revenue. Some people are bringing in a ton, some people are bringing in a smaller amount, and they're trying to get that jump off point. And when you don't have so many hundreds of thousands to spend on ad creative, you have to be very careful of how you distribute it. What you want to do is test a lot and test often. And so if you can focus that testing on one product, figure out the type of messaging, the type of creative, the type of ad essentially that your user, for lack of better words, vibes with, you can take that type of ad, that structure, that skeleton, and you can scale it to your different products. And I've seen this work across a bunch of different types of brands: activewear, leggings, apps. Just it's a I'm not going to say it's a foolproof strategy, but as close to that as you can get. It's really about focusing your testing and seeing what your audience likes, and then opening that up to your different product SKUs.
Yeah. Yeah. There's an element of risk minimization there, right? If you're starting with the one that you know sells best or people respond to the most, then all of a sudden you can play with these different creative variables with more likelihood of success than if you were just, shotgunning. And speaking of shotgunning, I was going to ask you, Pete. So in your experience with, the clients that you talk to, what do you see as sort of, and you spoke to this a little bit, but what do you see as like the number one mistake that people are making when they're thinking about what to sell next among the people?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because I think it's a complicated challenge, right? And one SKU brands may be a little bit simpler, and they have their own complexities and own challenges, right? It's like, what do you upsell, and kind of like, where do you go next? I think when I talk to a lot of brands, and Maya had touched on this, and I think it's kind of core to the DNA of how we help our clients think at Common Thread, but it's understanding how do your consumers consume content. And when I think about, like, this is a really simple example, but I just bought a printer. And when I was looking for a printer, the number one thing I was looking for was reviews. I wanted to know what printer was best based on the amount of reviews we had. And what were people saying about that? That's pretty different than if I were going to buy a hair care product. What I'm likely looking for is value props, things that are good for my hair, and potentially user generated content. So I think it's important to understand, okay, what does my SKU catalog actually look like? What am I actually selling? You think about this with companies like Theragun or Hyperice, right? They're selling like a massage therapy tool that's $600. Well, how do those consumers consume content? It's likely not just from an Instagram story saying, hey, our Hyperice is awesome. It's likely from a little bit of influencer marketing, a little bit of user generated content, a little bit of PR. It's a big purchase. You really have to validate the product that you're selling. Whereas when we talk to a lot of cosmetics brands, people are going to YouTube, they're looking up skincare routines. They want to see people applying the product. They want to see, well, how did the product work after I tried it for 3 weeks every single day? Am I better off than I was? Did the product actually work? So that's a whole different kind of like consumer category of how those people consume content. And it's based on what the brand is actually selling. So I think it's really important to deeply understand the types of products you're selling, and then spend some time with yourself, spend some time with the people that work for your brand and that are a part of it, and really get clear and honest about how do those people consume content, right? There's some brands that are probably awesome for the meme culture, and maybe memes help sell their content. And that's totally different than user generated content. And that's totally different than TechCrunch or Fast Company talking about how great Hyperice is, right? So I think there's a lot of elements when you identify, like, here's the portfolio of products that I have to sell. Now, obviously, like margin and kind of like best entry point into the brand, those are things you have to consider along the way. But I think specifically when it comes to creative, it's critically important to understand how your customers consume that content and be really honest with yourself. And it may feel like a stretch, right? It may not be the pretty brand creative that you shot. It may be reviews on screen, or it may be that UGC that's shot on an iPhone that looks low production value. But to be really honest with yourself and give that creative a chance, then you can sit there and say, hey, that didn't actually work. Let's go in a different direction. Or that really did work. Let's iterate on that and create some more assets for scale. So I think it's interesting when I talk to a lot of brands, because we talk to everybody: apparel, cosmetics, health and wellness, supplements, food and beverage, right, across the board. And it's different for every entrepreneur.
I was going to say, I mean, I think it would be a really valuable little spinoff piece to do with you, Maya, to talk about sort of like a industry by industry best practices guide, because I think we all sort of experience that there's certain ways that people are more likely to consume content about apparel, like the Instagram still with apparel, like for my clients in the past, anyway, has worked really, really well, but for a lot of other industries that doesn't work at all. And so, like, to your point, Pete, yeah, it's right. You have to think about how people consume content around your specific product at the price point that product is at, and make some sort of you can make some educated guesses about what type of content and actual creative is going to work based on the product that you're selling.
And I want to hear Maya's perspective on this, because I think she's probably got some interesting thoughts. But before it leaves my head, when we think about, like, and we recently did this in conversation with a brand, we're thinking about, like, what data points do we have as marketers to use to our advantage? And we were thinking about the plant category, right? Home plants, and everybody's been at home for COVID, and at home plant sales are probably higher than they've ever been because people have been stuck at home for the last year and they want to make their house look good. And so we were trying to understand, okay, if we're going to sell a fiddly fig, well, what information do we have to sell that product to someone, and why would they buy it from the brand that we're showcasing? And what we found is that was the most visited blog page, was how to care for my fiddly fig, right? So you have all this organic traffic going to this blog page, and people are looking up, how do I care for my fiddly fig? We've all gone through this. It sits in the corner, it maybe dies a little bit. But the idea then as marketers is to say, okay, we understand people's pain points now about buying my product. This is very unique to the plant space, right? A lot of products you buy it, you don't have to care for it. Plants, you have to care for it. You have to water it. You have to make sure that you maintain it. And so now as marketers, we're sitting there saying, hey, we have some information about this brand. We have some information about these consumers. So let's give them a piece of content that talks specifically about caring for your fiddly fig. Maybe it's user-generated content where someone says, hey, I bought this plant from this company, and this is what I've done to keep it really healthy for the last 3 weeks. Okay, let's serve that piece of content to the people who have been to the How to Care for Fiddly Fig page, because it's really, really, really relevant. So I think like those layers of specificity that maybe you don't think of at first touch point or first pass, to say, these are what my customers are doing. Well, let's just meet them where they're at with something that's engaging about my brand and that speaks specifically to a pain point. So that's, again, just a minute example of that. Would love to hear Maya's perspective on kind of like what that looks like in the creative world.
Yeah, I wanted to touch on that point, and also another one you brought up. So I think that something you said, Richard, which is, you can make an educated guess on this. I would say that what I tell my teams all the time, and what I talk to my creative strategists about, is like, with paid media creative, it's one part intuition, you as the creative person thinking, what is this person going to need where they're at in their life right now? And it's 3 parts you researching those thoughts and making sure that they're true. So not assuming what we think is important is actually important to the user, but thinking about how they might talk about the product and researching that. So a trick that I tell my creative strategists is like, when you come up with your first claim about a product, or your hook, or whatever you're going to say, like, for instance, Pete was talking about fiddly figs, like how to care for a fiddly fig, go Google it. See how people are actually asking that question. Maybe they have a quote and they're saying, I kill every single one of my fiddly figs. And that's what I want my creative strategist to open with. And then they'll probably talk about all the points that they want to see addressed. Now, all we have to do as a partner and an agent of the client is answer those questions for them. I actually think I might have an example for this if we want to check it out. But we have a client that does, it's the plants. And we made them somewhat of a blog post kind of piece of creative. And it answers some of those questions. So I don't know, do you want me to share my screen? I can.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay.
While you're on that, Maya, I think what's interesting is when they think about like, and obviously we're a direct-to-consumer e-commerce agency, so we're only dealing with that side of things, but I think there's an interesting relationship between like what brands do in retail informing their ad creative. So like there's a company called The Sill, while we're on the topic of plants, and The Sill sells direct-to-consumer plants, but The Sill pre-COVID had, and I don't know, what that looks like for them now, but they had stores. So they had one in West Hollywood, which is close to me here in Los Angeles. And the way that they merchandised the store is that they had a big window in the front and the light would come in the store. And all the plants that needed light were at the front of the store. And the back of the store is dark because there's no windows. So all the plants that didn't need a ton of light were at the back of the store. And so I think there's some unique thing we can draw on as marketers to think about, like, what are people doing in retail? What are brands doing in retail? And how is that representative of the ad creative? Because it's the same buying experience. You're going to go online, you're going to add something to your cart, and you're going to make a decision to buy it. But before e-commerce, people just went in the store and bought stuff. And so brands' opportunity to have creative that talked about their product was merely their retail function. What products were they showcasing? How are they showcasing it? Now you go in all these stores and they have a barista and they have all these things that try to get you to spend more time with the product so that you can feel it, so that you can try it on, so that you can engage with it. I think the same thing is true about the creative. Like, let's give more people opportunity to like be with the products and be with the brand in a way that's representative of that retail. So I'm excited to see this example, to see where you're headed here, Matt.
Yeah, and that's actually something I wanted to touch on, because I have a slightly different opinion about how brand and retail and paid media should function as a cohort together. But let's watch the ad and then let's dive back into that.
Yeah, sounds good.
So what this ad does well, and last time I checked, it's like doing great ROAS numbers, like exceeding our targets, and they're about to move this into remarketing. But this ad effectively asks the question that you would ask in Google: when do I water my plants? I don't know if any of you became plant parents during the pandemic, but I did. And I was overwatering them, and I was doing it the wrong way. And I didn't have holes at the bottom of my pots and all that stuff. It was just a mess. And if you do a quick Google search on something like this, those different points that were addressed by the team in the creative are the top things that people are asking. How do I water my plants? When do I water my plants? Should the leaves be wet? Should I be watering the soil directly? Should I water the leaves? When do I do it? How? And now we've packaged all that, but also brought in the product as the hero. Hey, you could do this on your own, right? You could go out. We've given you all the tips. We've given you the way that you can do this by yourself. But if you purchase from Bloomscape, you're going to get this delivered to your door. And by the way, you're going to have somebody that you can always go to our site to look at for plant tips, for plant care. So you don't have to do this alone. Like, we're making this a collaborative effort. But if you want to, feel free, because we've given you this education now. So it's a bit of a trust building exercise when we focus on their products and tell people what they want to know about these products. Which is what I think paid media exists to do, is to build trust. So I think commercials, traditional advertising, Super Bowl stuff, that is to build a brand, right? Clorox, they don't really sell you on all the benefits of their wipes anymore, or their bleach. Like, they might say kills 98% of bacteria, but then they don't tell you like the towel is super fluffy, or it won't rip when you use it, or any of that stuff. They're just telling you Clorox because you trust us. And so when I go to the store to buy cleaning products, if it says Clorox, even if I've never seen an ad, I'm probably going to buy it because I trust it. I think that it's a brand that works. With paid media, we're not necessarily trying to do that branding element. We're not trying to say, hey, Clorox, this is the brand you should get all these things from. We're trying to help you trust this one product, right? Maybe we're a makeup brand and we sell foundation, eyeshadow, brushes, concealer, primer, all the things. But we're just on paid media talking about foundation because that is the thing that everyone struggles with finding the answer to. But when they go to the site, they're going to know they need a primer to go with their foundation. They need an application brush. Maybe they want some eyeshadow because now they're completing a full look. And by the way, you get a free lipstick. So now they've got a whole situation going on, but we didn't have to talk about the brushes, the eyeshadow, the concealer and primer in the ad. We just had to show them the foundation works. And now they trust all of those products. So it's a little bit different between the brand and how we do it on paid media and how they do it in retail sites, because they, you can see all of the different products. Like you said, Pete, they've got the plants in the front that need light, the plants at the back that don't need light. The way that we might say that is like, hey, did you know not all of your plants can be outside? and then we show the product and we build that trust. So I think it's an interesting relationship, how organic, paid, regular traditional advertising, and then in-store experiences work together to create a brand.
Yeah, totally. And I was thinking, as you were speaking there, Maya, that's a great way to frame sort of the purpose or the direct response element of paid media advertising as well. Because in my opinion, anyway, the best way to build that trust is to get them to try it once, try it and love it, and then come back. And that's how you create that trust. You create that word of mouth, where eventually at some point you can become a brand where everybody just knows who you are, and the trust is already kind of baked into the logo. But yeah, what on for clients that are the size that our clients are, the number one way to build trust is to create advertising that drives a direct response, that causes somebody to try it, and then grow to trust it because of that physical experience of the product. Yeah, no, that's a fantastic point.
Yeah, there's a little plug for one of our partners called Try Now, and their whole philosophy is kind of like the Warby Parker model that they piloted. Which, to Richard, your point just brought this up in my mind, is like when Warby Parker got started, at least kind of somewhat in their infancy stage, you could get 5 pairs shipped to your house and then ship 4 back and keep the one that you like. Yeah. And Try Now, one of the partners, works with a lot of apparel brands. They work with one of the apparel brands that we work with. And the idea is Try Now, we'll ship it to you, and then you only buy kind of what you keep kind of model. And there's, variations of apparel brands that do this and, where it's relevant. But I think it's interesting, right? If you try the product and the product's awesome, well, then you've got a customer for a long time. And then you can look at things like LTV and product development and upsells and things that grow the LTV of your customer. And so using creative in a way to convince somebody that the product is right for them to try, then it's on the product to make sure that the product's awesome to fulfill that.
Well, I was going to say one thing, speaking of kind of like removing barriers to trial, like one thing that I love about that, was Bloomscape, right? My plan ad that you just showed. So there's kind of something I always found sort of irritating, which is this idea that like in your advertising, you have to give like this sort of like great organic content, I guess, will necessarily result in a sale, right? Like if I just produce an ad that's like 5 tips to doing this, that's going to inevitably result in somebody actually making the purchase. But what I think that Bloomscape ad does a great job of is by giving sort of a series of tips that are useful generally. Like if you already have houseplants, you can watch that ad and then go kind of take care of your houseplants. But it also sort of removes a very important barrier to purchasing a plant, which is that like I always kill my plants, right? And so if somebody has that in their mind, all of a sudden like you've given this tutorial to how to not kill your plant, and all of a sudden you don't really have that excuse to not buy anymore. Like it's all kind of fallen away. And then the trial of that product becomes way less risky because you've been given the information on how to actually care for the thing and make the product actually work for you. So
that's awesome. That's awesome. And I think off of that, like, and we're getting off on a little tangent here, but I think you can broaden your customer base then. If you understand the barriers to entry for different types of consumers. I have a little dog. And so what I'm interested in is dog-friendly plants. Well, that's my barrier to purchase on a company like Bloomscape, is I want to make sure that the plant I put in the corner the dog doesn't eat. Because if the dog eats it, we're going to the emergency vet. Okay, so now we think about like that's a whole subset of consumers that have pets that want to buy plants. What is their barrier to entry? They're worried about that. Okay, dog-friendly plants, dog-friendly piece of content that's exactly like the one Maya just showed. Well, let's knock off the 3 or 4 items or ideas when thinking about like keeping plants safe in the house with animals. Okay, well then there's a whole set of consumers that we just unlocked based on the products we have and based on the barrier to entry that we know. So I think, Richard, to take that point is like, that's an awesome way to then say, okay, what are all the barriers to entry and how does the creative solve that? And how does that open up more consumers for us in that vein?
Plants is an interesting example to bring us back to the how you select your product question that we started with. Plants are a bit different than apparel because you just have so many different types of plants. And a lot of people, depending on where your consumer is in their plant journey, they might not know the difference between your different types of plants. Somebody might know they want a monstera or a money tree, or they want a snake plant. Other people just want a plant that's easy to take care of. So how do you talk to those people? Similar to the pet friendly people, you say, here are your beginner plants or beginner friendly plants that you probably won't kill, that are really hard to kill, or something like that. But then throughout an ad like this, or a sill ad, or whatever other plant companies you have, you can show a lot of your different plant products, because it's not as different as an apparel brand, right? It's kind of about taste, but people want a breadth of plants usually. So you can kind of show them that you have a wide variety, and that's going to tell them, okay, if I go to this site, I can probably find the one that I want. It's a little bit different, I think, with live things, apps and apparel. So you have to decide who your audience is and how much of your portfolio or of your available product you want to show them in an ad, and how much can they consume quickly. Because another thing we need to think about is when we're on Instagram, when we're on Facebook, TikTok, Snapchat, YouTube, we've had it with the day. Probably we're taking a break, we're waiting on our lunch to heat up, we're in the line at Walmart or wherever, and we're not trying to think really hard. So what is an easy product that people are going to be able to consume while they're in that space and get excited about? That's another, I think, consideration when you're picking a product.
Yeah, totally. I was going to say, just kind of a way to summarize everything that we've been saying here, is that the product has a profound impact on what your creative looks like. And I think a huge error that I see entrepreneurs make coming into sort of developing a creative strategy is thinking that certain formats will work because they're formats that work on Facebook. And there's a little bit of truth to that. And I go into it, I think I'm in point 3 or 4 of my article, where I talk about, yes, things have to be cropped square and you should probably put captions on your video, maybe, but there's such a powerful intuitive element to saying, like, no, everybody consumes every product and every kind of product in a pretty different way. And unless you're starting with the product, which is the most important part of it, it's what you're selling. Unless you're starting with the product and building everything out around that product and understanding how people are going to consume content about that product, understanding how people feel about the product relative to the price that you put it at. Like, unless you understand those things, you can't even begin your creative strategy, because just still images, like throwing a bunch of still images into your account or whatever, doesn't necessarily work, because every type of product is so different and demands a different type of creative.
Or it might work, but you don't know why, and so you can't replicate it, right?
Right.
Yeah,
and that's actually, yeah, that's a huge problem too, where you hit but you don't know why. But that feeling that you did hit gives you this sort of like false intuitive sense that, like, oh, this works, even though it was sort of random chance. And so you're not actually able to replicate it later, because there isn't that initial thought work based on premises and hypotheses that you then sort of go forward and test.
And I think what that kind of like moves into in a lot of conversations with brands, and not deeply understanding like the foundational cause of the result, is a lot of this idea, especially in the paid media world, of like, all right, let's throw a piece of creative out there and test it. Okay, it worked for a little bit. Okay, now it's not working. What do we do? Okay, let's throw another piece of creative out there and test it. And you get into this cycle where you're kind of just testing all the time, right? And it's like you see a little bit of ROAS increase and a little bit of spend increase for 2 weeks, and your business is awesome and everybody's happy. And then that creative stops working. And it's like, oh no, what do we do now? And the response is often, well, let's try another piece of creative, or let's just throw something out there and see if it works. And maybe you hit on that and you ride that for a week and then it dies. And now we're in this kind of like cyclical game of just like spitting out creative and trying it. But to Maya's point, and to your point, Richard, like, we don't understand the foundational cause of what is happening with the creative. Like, what are people resonating with and why? So it's this idea of like, I talk a lot about it in the business development process, is like account consolidation. Give your products and give your ad account an opportunity to learn on the creative, and then we can make adjustments on it. Don't try 30 pieces of creative with a little bit of budget here and there. because we'll never actually know. I think brands that do a good job of this are like Our Place and Caraway, these like pots and pans home brands. They deeply understand the consumer. They're showing you creative where people are cooking in the kitchen. That's really interesting on Instagram. People are making pasta in the kitchen and the steam's flying and they're using the pan, or they have a fried egg in the pan and it's swirling around on the inside of the pan because it's non-stick. And it's like, okay, they deeply understand the problem their product solves, which is like buying pans at Costco or like some outdated experience. And they understand how to create content for the platform. People always are looking for food and restaurants and things like that on Instagram, and they marry that really well. So I think there's a lot of factors that play into like they deeply understand their product, which is really critical and like what it's here to solve.
You have to have that foundation of thought. Otherwise, there's something that really crazy that happens, which is, and maybe it's because of the nature of like sort of how Facebook ads manager feels and looks, but people treat their ad account and their creative like sort of like they're like speculating on crypto or something, where it's just like it's all a crapshoot. Who knows what's going to happen? You kind of then you start sort of looking for these gurus who can like, oh, they can predict what's going to work and what isn't. But it doesn't actually have to be like that at all. Unlike speculating on the stock market or whatever, you can really affect the outcome by understanding the consumer first, by understanding your product and understanding how people relate to it. Like it just does not have to be this sort of like feast or famine game of roulette, you know?
And that's a way to improve people's ad experience. Like, I don't know if you're going to meet too many people that are like, yes, I get on Instagram for the ads, right? Sometimes I do. Like when I'm looking for a phone case, I'm like, please pop up. But if we're giving people content that actually speaks to them, that actually meets them where they are, addresses their questions, we're doing less of a harm because we're telling people what they want to know, right? Then they're like, this ad makes sense to me. It's for me. I want to buy this because I want to do X, Y, and Z with my life. And this is going to make me happy. So that's what we're trying to do with this creative. I think, and it's possibly different from a lot of advertising techniques and best practices in the past, but how can we do the most social good with the ads that we create? We can create them for real people and not for who we think people are.
Yeah. Oh my God. I mean, that summarizes everything about this, and maybe even the whole article, is that the people on the other end of your ads are real people, just like you or me, you know, who have hopes and dreams and desires and want things. And if you can build your strategy around understanding that those people are people, then you're in so much better of a spot in terms, just obviously in terms of performance, but in terms of, I think, doing something that's valuable, that can even be valuable to the world. And I think, if all great creative strategy is about figuring out how to put yourselves into the shoes of those real people in an authentic enough way that you're kind of able to intuit what they would feel about the advertising that you create. Otherwise, it just turns into this game where you're like looking at a series of numbers and you're like turning things on and off, and you don't really know why anything is happening because you're treating the people who purchase your product as sort of like as bots or something, right? Like you're just sort of playing a video game that's costing you a lot of money.
We can't really wrap it up on a better note than that, I don't think. That was like the sum that brought it all together. That was awesome. I think it's interesting. Really, like we're all consumers, right? We're all on our phones. We're all in touch with this stuff. It's like, what's interesting? What's going to keep me around to engage with the content, right? Like magazines and like the New York Times does a great job of this. Like they post interesting content. They publish interesting content because it gets people to stick around and read it. So as brands, like, let's make interesting content for real people that are going to explore the problem and the product. Yeah. And let's figure out the most thoughtful way to do that, so that people are actually going to watch past 3 seconds because they actually care about the thing, not because they forgot it and they just left it on their Instagram screen. So I think Maya hit that one perfectly. Is like, we're trying to advertise for real people, which is really cool.
Exactly right. Think about one. I think this is an easy tip to just put into practice right away. But as you shop, observe yourself shopping online. I think it's super easy. It's oftentimes, like when you buy things, it's kind of an automatic set of actions, right? It's very, I don't know, it's like doing the dishes or something like that. You're not like actually that focused on what you're doing. And if you can sort of like step back from yourself as you go about the sort of normal e-com shopping that you do, and understand like, oh yeah, I guess I hate it when I get a shipping, when I get $7 of shipping tacked on at the end. Like, instead of you don't necessarily have to go to like all this sort of market research or whatever to figure that out. You can start with something that you felt within yourself and begin to pull on that thread and pursue it to see if other people feel the same way about purchasing similar products to yours. But yeah, I mean, it's real people on the other end. You're a real person. It's not a bad place to start.
Best advice I can give to somebody that is about to start direct response media creative and creation: become a shopaholic yourself.
Yeah.
Dive in there. What makes you purchase? Like you said, I by genetics am a serial shopper, so blessed and also stressed because I'm trying to spend all my money. But I would say let that be your research. It's kind of fun research, right? Shop, understand what things you're looking for. What are the risks that you're not willing to take? What do you wish that brands were answering for you, and put that in your creative.
That's brilliant. That's the first rule of like any creative field is, if you want to write, you have to read. If you want to play music, you have to listen to music. If you want to sell things, you have to buy a lot of things. Just like do the thing that you want to create.
This is going to set us up nicely for our next episode. I feel like we're on a roll here. We got a lot of good stuff to talk about. So I hope people find this valuable.
Yeah. So we've started with the product, talking about, obviously that's the most important thing. We say, make the product the hero. You got to figure out who your hero is. Obviously, I'd love if we could do a follow-up at some point about like just best practices for different like industries, because that's a great place to start with beginning to differentiate like the way people consume different things. But for the purposes of this, I think like the next step in the article is, so it goes product and then it goes people, right? We've been talking a lot about people. The people section is more of the tactics about how do you actually find out who's on the other end of those ads? Who are the real people that I'm selling to, and how are they interacting with this product? And what are some simple tools that I can use? I mean, it is the internet age. Everything is out there. Everybody shares everything with everybody else all the time. So it's all available to you. But thanks for tuning in. Thank you, Pete. Thank you, Maya.
Yeah, this was awesome. Hope everyone finds it valuable. I think we've got some good real life examples for step 2 of this process when we think about research to talk like a consumer or to talk like real people. We've got some good real life examples. I'm excited for that.
That's great.